Hi, nice to see everyone again. Now, in the previous Teacher Rob Talks videos, I've talked about different things, such as how a curriculum works and how each grade has standards of what you need to know before you proceed to the next grade. This is also called a learning outcome, and that there's a progression to how you learn in English to do different things. For example, in reading, you learn how to decode one of the 200 different symbols that can have 44 different sounds, and each of those 44 different sounds is recognized as having a meaning. Well, then each of the word parts not only has a sound, it has a meaning. And we decode that meaning. This is called the roots approach. And so a person learns to very quickly be able to do this on words that he or she knows, and then use the same approach to attack new words. Well, this is why reading is so critical for being a good speaker. And reading literature, in particular, is the most important because reading and interpreting literature is key to developing what are called inferential reasoning skills. Now, and some other things are connected to this. It's related to something called deep reading that I will get into in another video. But deep reading is also related to the creation of empathy. Empathy is a higher process in the brain. Well, so, okay, you need to read books and you need to read literature, but now let's talk about a second language learner, especially an adult. This person is busy trying to figure out how to communicate, and so they end up getting a very simplified version of English that kind of skips all of these different steps that a person educated in English would go through, and goes right to trying to use words. Well, in communication, plus this person has an accent, and an accent is caused by a person who learned one language. Now, the operating system of their brain, unless they were exposed to the target language, the second language, namely English, as a child, their operating system is in their native language, and so the brain is kind of like the keys on the keyboard of a piano. You strike this key, and it's going to make a sound that is recognized in your native language. Well, it will look for the sound in your native language that most closely matches the English sound. Well, there may not be one. So that's your accent. Is your brain is trying to use your language to speak English. Well, then people say you need to learn to think in English. Well, you really can't in some ways. You can learn to do something else, but it requires a lot of time and work, and it definitely requires deep reading. Now, most people, unless they really devote themselves as a lifetime project, are not going to do this. They're going to get to a stage which some people call good enough English. And good enough English also involves a lot of guessing of what people mean when they say, and very often this guessing is not accurate. It also means very often they speak in a simplified version of English, which, even if it's understood, may be interpreted that the person is not that intelligent. Now, this is one of the bases for racism, is people hear someone speaking particularly a Westerner or a native English speaker, hears a non-native English speaker speaking English, and they're using this simplified version that may also have a lot of incorrect usages, and they think, yeah, this person's not that smart. Well, they probably are very smart, but just the way they use English doesn't make them sound that way. So if you're a second language learner and you really want to master English and have that kind of educated English speaker sound, you really need to continue. And also, you need to, in a sense, go back to some of those earlier steps that you didn't have in your English education. And you have to realize that the shortcuts that happen in ESL of learning how to communicate, and ESL teachers will also say the most often used words, well, you end up speaking a kind of simplified traveler's English, such as you would learn from a phrase book that you go to a foreign country and you learn how to say, how much is that shirt, or something like that. ESL instruction is often just a very complex version of this. And so this is a challenge for me as an adult ESL teacher, is trying to get the adult learners to get interested in reading English literature, in learning more about word decoding, in learning more about the roots of words, rather than just learning phrase after phrase. Because what happens to a person who is learning a second language, you have your native language, which is called L1. What is called the target language is called L2. So let's say your native language, you're a native speaker of Italian. Well, and the target language, L2, is English. You're going to start speaking English before you become a native speaker, obviously. So your version of English is somewhere between native speaker and your native language. You're a native speaker of Italian, you want to sound and communicate like a native speaker in English, but you're somewhere in between, but you can communicate. All right, so you're there. That is what is called an interlanguage. And a lot of people will say, okay, it's good enough. I'm not going to push to get to a higher level. Unfortunately, this leads to something called interlanguage fossilization. And that means that all the errors and mistakes you make and ways that you use words that aren't exactly impressive, they become fossilized, turned to stone. This is your version of English. And your brain says, okay, it's correct. Well, that is actually harder to change than if you didn't know anything. Interlanguage fossilization means your brain is satisfied that this is English, and then you have to unlearn the mistakes that you use in the way you use English, and that unlearning and then learning the correct version is a lot of work, and it's hard. So this is one of the challenges and one of the satisfactions that I get of doing one-to-one lessons. It's pretty hard to deal with interlanguage fossilization in a class. And I hope this video was interesting to you. Please like and leave your comments below. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.